Good morning, and thank you for joining me today as we pause here in the middle of the week to connect at least as much as we are able to connect, and also to think for a few moments about some of the literature that provides the foundation of our faith, some of the biblical texts or hymns that are pretty deeply embedded in many of us, texts and hymns which have offered wisdom or guidance or comfort, or especially in the case of hymns, how some of the hymns that we have sung all of our lives have expressed in some beautiful poetry what we most deeply believe in our hearts, knowing that part of the joy of singing them is that we get to say these things out loud alongside those who are worshiping with us. And there's something about the combination of words and music that is transcendent. When my son was a teenager and he'd be enamored with the latest pop song on the radio, he'd say to me, "Dad, don't you think this is a great song?" And I'm sure I drove him crazy, but I'd say, "We'll see." My point being that we judge the greatness of a song or a book or a poem or a movie or almost any work of art not in the moment but in the long run. Does it continue to move us? Does it continue to speak to us? Does it continue to resonate with something deep in us, not just in this moment, but for generations? The hymns that my professor thought we ought to know by heart would, by this definition, be great, for they have stood the test of time and have been sung by congregations across the generations. And the one I want us to think about this morning is one that I just happen to love, "Now Thank We All Our God." Like a lot of the great hymns, the backstory of this hymn adds richness to it. It was written by Martin Rinkart, a German Lutheran pastor serving in the town of Eilenburg during the horrors of the 30 Years' War and the year of the Great Pestilence. At one point, there were 4 ministers in Eilenburg, but one eventually abandoned his post. It was just too awful there, and then Rinkart officiated at the funerals of the other 2. And then over time, as the only pastor in town, he presided over almost 5,000 funerals, including that of his wife. Yet, while death and despair saturated the world in which he lived, Rinkart wrote this timely and timeless prayer of thanksgiving for his children, a reminder to be grateful to God for all things at all times. The words are familiar to you, I'm sure. Now thank we all our God with heart and hands and voices, who wondrous things have done, in whom this world rejoices, who from our mother's arms has blessed us on our way with countless gifts of love, and still is ours today. Oh, may this bounteous God through all our life be near us, with ever joyful hearts and blessed peace to cheer us, and keep us in God's grace, and guide us when perplexed, and free us from all ills in this world and the next. All praise and thanks to God, who reigns in highest heaven, to Father and to Son and Spirit now be given, the one eternal God, whom earth and heaven adore, for thus it was, is now, and shall be evermore. A few lines in this hymn stand out to me. Who from our mother's arms has blessed us on our way. This speaks of an enduring faithfulness, a God who has been with us since we were in our mother's arms, since we were too young to know what sort of world into which we've been born. But the comfort we felt in our mother's arms has continued unabated, because even when we got too big for anyone to hold us, God has held us. And keep us in God's grace and guide us when perplexed. Perplexed, I think, is an elegant word for how we feel a lot of the time. When our questions of why go unanswered, when we are confused by the injustice we see and feel, when we lament the brokenness, and when we wonder how long we'll need to wait for the culmination and the fulfillment of God's promise to redeem and heal the world. But the truth is, my perplexity must pale in comparison to Martin Rinkart's perplexity. But rather than allowing himself to get mired down by his unanswered questions, he turned to God in thanksgiving and trust, seeking not the answers to all of his questions, but the guidance of God, trusting that God was working to free us from all ills in this world and the next. And the culmination of this short hymn is praise. All praise and thanks to God, God the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Here, Martin Rinkert seems to be guided by the Apostle Paul's admonition to pray without ceasing, to give thanks to God in every circumstance. How difficult must it have been for this overwhelmed young pastor to give thanks in the circumstances in which he found himself. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that he didn't have his moments of overwhelming fear and dread, and that there were some days when praise did not well up in his heart. But when he put pen to paper and thought about what point of view he wanted to endure, he began with the words, "Now thank we all our God." And God's people have been singing that hymn in good times and in bad ever since the middle of the 17th century. So it meets my criteria of standing the test of time. And my guess is that we'll be singing it for a long time to come, because it helps us to remember some things we need to remember. My prayer this morning is taken from a Celtic prayer, a morning prayer. And so for a moment, let's join together in prayer. Calm me, O Lord, as you stilled the storm. Still me, O Lord, keep me from harm. Let all the tumult within me cease. Enfold me, Lord, in your peace. And let the peace of God be over me to shelter me, under me to uphold me, about me to protect me, behind me to direct me, and ever with me to save me. Through Jesus the Christ, forever and ever. Amen. God's peace be with you, and with those you love, and with God's people everywhere, now and forevermore. Amen.